In today's video, I'm going to be talking about what my favorite lens is. This is actually the lens that I'm talking about. If you guys want to know what lens I'm holding, make sure you stick around for the entire video so you guys can find out, as well as what I like about it, what I don't like about it, and everything in between. Before we start this video, as always, make sure to subscribe and like. It really does help this channel grow, and I appreciate every single one of you that does. While you're at it, go ahead and drop a comment in the comment section below. It helps the algorithm push this video to new viewers, which is always awesome and always appreciated. And I appreciate every single one of you that takes the time to actually do that. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into this video. I don't want to waste any of you guys' time, so let's get right into it. If you guys want to jump to a certain part of the video, I will have all of the timestamps in the description below, as well as have it in chapters on the timeline. Before we start, let's go ahead and let me show you guys what lens I'm talking about. That is the 50mm Sony 1.8. I absolutely love this lens. This lives on my camera 99% of the time now. Let's get into why I love this lens, the things I like about it, and the things that I don't like about it as much. I'll talk about everything I like about the lens first and have everything I don't like about the lens at the end. But yeah, let's get right into it. And the first thing I like about this lens is just the absolute portability of this lens. Look how small this thing is. This lens is so tiny. It can fit in your pocket. It can fit in any bag in your backpack. It can fit basically anywhere without taking up a ton of space. This has less space than my fist does. So like, I don't know why that's a metric I used, but it is really small. So the thing I like about this lens is because it's so small, it's really light, it's really portable. You can take it anywhere without it kind of weighing you down. You can, if you're a type of person like me that carries multiple lenses, you don't have to sacrifice one of your other lenses to make sure this one fits. This just doesn't take up any space whatsoever. This is so small. This is one of my favorite things about this lens. It's just absolutely how small it is. Obviously there is a lens hood that comes with it, but the lens hood doesn't really add too much size. This lens is just ultimately super small and super portable, as well as really light, which is one of the other things that I love about it. It's just how light this actually is. I don't know the actual weight of it, but it's not enough that it'll bog you down. And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind because, for example, I like using Sony because Sony is very small, because Sony is very light. The whole mirrorless thing, I absolutely love it. I've been with Sony since the beginning. Sony, if you're watching this, please sponsor me. But basically, if you're buying a Sony camera or buying a mirrorless, you're buying it because of the size, you're buying it because it's small, you're buying it because you want that form factor. I find it pretty counterintuitive to buy this very small, very light body and then just throw a gigantic lens on it, because that just kind of defeats the purpose of getting a small body. There's just no reason to get a really small camera if your main set of lenses are going to be just as heavy, if not heavier than the body itself, because then you're just gonna be throwing everything out of whack. It's gonna be awkward to hold. And with the small bodies, you don't really have too much grip onto it to begin with. So having these gigantic lenses is just gonna make it super weird, and it's gonna make it super awkward to hold. Another pro for it being this small is it's very inconspicuous, which means if you're out in public and you're shooting, people aren't gonna be turning their heads to look at you. Whereas if you had a gigantic Sigma art lens on it, people would look at you and people would take you a little bit more professionally, which can be a bad thing if you're shooting in public, because sometimes they'll come up to you and ask you not to shoot there. Sometimes they'll come up to you and ask for a permit, depending on where you live. There's just a whole lot more of a headache when you go walk around with very big, expensive looking gear. Whereas with this bad boy, no one's gonna look at you and be like, oh, he's a professional. No one's gonna look at you suspiciously when you have this mounted onto your camera. That is one of my favorite things I like about this lens. It's just how small, how portable, how inconspicuous it is. Next, let's talk about its actual optics. And one of the things I really love about this lens is it stops all the way down to 1.8. If you guys follow me on social media and you guys are familiar with my work, you know that I love shooting in really low light situations. And because of this, I need a lens that's fast. I need a lens that's able to open up pretty wide. Obviously 1.8 isn't as low as lenses get. Lenses can get all the way down to like 0.95. Not only is 1.8 great for low light, but it's also really good for bokeh. If you are a bokeh fanatic, like 99% of the people I see on the internet are, you're gonna enjoy that 1.8. Obviously that 1.8 is gonna look different on a crop sensor than it does on a full frame. I primarily shoot on my full frame now, so that bokeh is extra creamy. But if you do shoot on a crop sensor, this lens will still work on it, except instead of a 50mm focal length, it'll be a 75mm focal length. But you will still be getting some pretty good bokeh. You'll be getting good bokeh, you'll be getting some good low light performance. And for how small it is, I think that's a really good deal. Now, let's talk about its focal length, which is 50mm, which is one of the main reasons I love this lens. Obviously, these are all main reasons I love this lens, but the 50mm is one of the biggest. And that's because I do portrait photography primarily. 50mm, I think, is the perfect focal length for portraits. When you're shooting portrait photography, you want to keep it pretty realistic. You want everything to look like how it does in real life. When you shoot with something that's super zoomed in, like an 85 millimeter, yes, your proportions are gonna be good, but you're cropping in the surroundings so much to the point where it doesn't even look like you're in the place that you actually are. You know, when you go out to a really cool field or to like mountains in the back or something, and you use like an 85, it's going to compress the image so much that you're not really even going to be able to take advantage of your surroundings, and driving out to that cool location is going to be for nothing, because with the compression combined with the bokeh of like an 85, you're not really going to even be able to see the details in the background. Now, obviously an 85 is good for bringing the background forward, you know, because of the compression, but for a lot of portraits, in my opinion, I like to incorporate just a little bit of the environment, especially if I'm going to a cool location, and the 50 millimeter is perfect for that. Now you might be thinking to yourself, if you love the environment, get a 35. Well, to anyone who's saying that, I do have a 35, and my biggest gripe with the 35 is it incorporates too much of the environment. So when you're shooting with a 35 millimeter for portraits, it is going to start deforming how the people look a little bit. It's going to start distorting things towards the edge of the lens, and it's going to make limbs look a little bit longer. It's going to make, you know, if you're extending your arms are going to look a lot longer. Your legs are going to look a lot longer. Obviously not as much as like a super wide angle lens, but it is going to start deforming how the person looks, which takes away from the reality of it, which is one of the main reasons I like using the 50 millimeter. It makes it look realistic. The 35 millimeter also just gets, in my opinion, a little bit too much of the environment. If you're an environmental style shooter where you like to incorporate a lot of your environment, go for it. That's gonna be a great lens for you. But for me, I like to make sure that the subject is the main focus of the photo, and I feel like with a 35 it's a little bit harder to do, because you do incorporate so much in the environment that sometimes the eye can wander and start looking at the environment more than it does the actual person. And you don't want to get too close to the face with the 35, because again, you're going to start distorting it. So the 50 millimeter, you get a little bit of that environment to kind of show scenery and show where you are, but it still makes the subject the main focus of the photo. Most of the photos you guys have seen from me for the last year have been on a 50 millimeter or a 50 millimeter equivalent. I say equivalent because if you do use crop sensors, you need to factor in that 1.5 times crop. 50 millimeters on a full frame is 50 millimeters. 50 millimeters on a crop sensor is 75 millimeters. So keep that in mind when you're choosing your lenses. Next, let's move on to one of the most important things, in my opinion, for anyone who's looking to buy new gear, and that is the price. This lens comes in at only a couple $100s. That's super affordable. That's super cheap. If you just bought your brand new camera and you just shelled out your entire allowance for 3 months on a brand new body, chances are you don't want to go and spend another $2,000 on a single lens when you don't really even know how to use that camera yet. So this is a really good alternative. This is a really cheap lens. It's only a couple $100s, and it's going to get you some really great photos to get you started when you just get your camera. This is, in my opinion, still one of my favorite lenses. I obviously have enough money to upgrade to one of the G primes, but I don't want to because I don't feel the need to. This gets the job done for almost everything I needed to, and it's such a good package for what you're paying for that I just don't really see the need to upgrade to a bigger version of it, essentially, because if I do upgrade to the G Prime, sure, I'm going to get a little bit of sharper quality, but it's going to be bigger, it's going to be heavier, it's going to bog down the portability, it's going to take away everything else that I like about the lens while not really giving me that much. So for me and for what I do, I'm still rocking with this. I'm still loving it. I'm gonna stay loving it for a while to come. You're getting a ton of really good things in a really small package for a really good price. So you really can't argue with that. For all the positives that you are getting for it for a couple $100s, I think that far outweighs the negatives about this lens. But this lens isn't perfect, so let's talk about the negatives that do come with this lens. The first thing I can think of when I think about this lens is just how cheap it feels. Obviously, you do get what you pay for. You're not gonna get a full metal body housing when you only pay a couple $100s. This lens is, I don't know how well you can hear it. This lens is completely plastic. So everything about this lens is plastic. Everything about this lens feels cheap. It doesn't feel premium, which to me doesn't really matter because I'm not the type to need to look fancy. This lens feels cheap. This lens does not feel premium because you definitely didn't pay a premium price for it. To me, that's not that big of a deal. I don't really care about how premium something feels or looks. I care more about its functionality. And for me, the functionality of this thing far outweighs its looks. But for some people, they might care about the appearance of the lens and how premium it looks. And this definitely does not cut the bill. This is just not a very premium looking lens. It's not a premium feeling lens. It's completely plastic, which is good for portability, but it's not good for feeling premium, if that makes sense. If you're big on appearance of things for whatever reason, this lens probably isn't for you because it does not come off as a premium looking lens. The next thing about this lens that is really annoying, and it's one of the only things I just don't really like about it, is this lens telescopes. So when it's trying to focus, the focus motor is going to push the lens element up and down in a way where anything in front of the lens is going to kind of interact with the lens. It's very annoying because I like to use filters on my lenses, and sometimes I'm putting a new filter on and it just starts telescoping on me and I have to turn off the camera, and that's just one extra step I don't like taking that I don't have to take with my other lenses because my other lenses don't telescope. This one does telescope, so you have to keep that in mind. This probably isn't going to be ideal to be used with like a matte box or something else like that, but in my opinion, I don't know why you would be using this for a matte box anyways, but you probably won't be able to, even if you wanted to, because it does telescope and it does have moving elements on it. And because of that, it makes it almost impossible to mount things onto it. Obviously, you can mount your lens filters on it, but you'll have to do it when the camera is off, which is, like I said, one extra inconvenience that you have to take, but in my opinion is worth it for everything else you get. So keep in mind, if you do purchase this lens, it does telescope, which is pretty annoying in my opinion. And finally, I couldn't talk about a lens without talking about its quality and its optics. And the optics on this lens, they aren't perfect by any means. They aren't crystal clear perfect. So one thing I notice about this lens is it does have some color aberrations when you start getting a little bit to the farther edges of the frame. It does have some vignette, it does have some artifacts, it does have some things that make it imperfect, but in my opinion, that isn't really that much of a con to me because I don't really care about those kind of things. I don't want my photos to be perfectly clear. I don't want my photos to look crystal clear. I don't want my photos to look overly sharp. I don't like that kind of look. I feel like it takes the humanity away from your photos. And if you're doing portrait photography, you want your models and the people that you're photographing to look as natural as possible. Now, the quality of this lens isn't perfect. The optics aren't perfect, but at the end of the day, you are only paying a couple $100s for this lens. So you're not going to be getting G prime level sharpness, autofocus, and all those other things. With all those things aside, I personally still think that all of the pros of this lens far outweigh the cons of this lens. And I still recommend everybody go and pick up one of these if you don't have a 50mm yet, because it's not going to break the bank. You'll have a 50mm equivalent, and then you'll be able to experiment with that focal length. And if you love it and if you really want to upgrade, you can just get a new lens and just sell this off to someone else. So this is a really good lens. I think everyone should have one of these in their bag because it's literally not even taking up any space. This is smaller than the kit lens, for crying out loud. Like, it's tiny. That is my favorite lens. This is the lens that lives on my camera 99% of the time. The camera I use is the A7 III. This pairs perfectly with it. It's a super small package. I can throw it in my bag. I can travel with it. I don't have any gripes. And the small things I don't like about it really are nothing compared to all the things I do like about it. And that is why the Sony 50mm 1.8 is my current favorite lens. So thank you guys for watching. If you guys want to purchase this lens, it'll be the first link in the description below. Sony does not sponsor me, unfortunately. So Sony, if you're watching this, give your boy a sponsorship. But anyways, I love this lens. Everyone should have it. If you shoot Sony, you should have one of these in your bag. But that about does it. That does it for this video. That was my favorite lens. If you guys have any questions regarding the lens, leave them in the comment section below and I'll try and answer all of them. Make sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss out on future videos, and I will see you guys in the next one. See ya.